They have all given their perspective on this whole aspect of sustainable infrastructure for future growth. What are the key considerations if we are to future-proof our infrastructure? Who finances this infrastructure? Who decides that it's sustainable? Where should, or who should set this particular criteria? Yes, it will be different for different countries, different for different institutions, but there really has to be some common elements. We have had issues around natural capital and the importance of understanding and appreciating ecosystem services and ecosystem infrastructure. We've heard about the importance of collaboration, and collaboration not just nationally between financiers and developers or project owners, but also between financial institutions, both private financiers and development financiers, but also multilateral finance institutions. We've also heard about the need to reconfigure infrastructure and what we regard as sustainable infrastructure, and go beyond the bridges, go beyond the dams, and just look at the key elements that are required at that particular point of need, and putting people at the center and making sure that human justice and the views of grassroots communities and even those that are below the poverty line are taken into consideration.
Really, from January this year, we got a new access to information policy, which basically, talks about, the basic assumption is, everything should be disclosed, unless there are some business problems. So, the basic principle is more and more disclosure. That's under our newest access to information policy. Before that, we had a public information policy, which was a little more restrictive. But then, at least in the information disclosure, we are certainly, becoming more and more aggressive in sharing information with the general public. Now, let me go half step back. The collaboration with civil society in general, that, actually, every year we have our annual meetings. The civil society events is probably the biggest event. As we have, 3-4 day annual meeting, there is a continuous program for the civil society. And true that, in terms of the project context, project development, or project implementation, the involvement of civil society, okay, including and particularly those with, the female or the, let's say, the groups, advocating the diversity, certainly the very essential part of the requirements actually for us to approve any project and then keep continuing, the implementation of the project. Now, in a way that, special effort in dealing with civil society actually is given to our work with the youth groups in Asia. Basically, we believe that, we really need to hear more from the perspectives of young people. And again, we have been supporting this, the youth movement together with, other NGOs.
Thank you, Mark. Maybe just reflect on the question on food systems, and Arthur, I would like you to also weigh in on that one.
Urban infrastructure investments that are creating integrated middle-class settlements around shopping malls. A very good example would be Tatu City, north of Nairobi. Many other, as South African developers and South African retailers have moved into Africa, they've exported the South African middle-class urban development model, which has disconnected a lot of middle-class buyers through the proliferation of the retailers from local food value chains. And it's also reduced the quality of food. So I think we have to completely rethink the way in which we understand the relationship between urban systems, peri-urban farmers, and agricultural value chains. not just from a livelihoods point of view, but also from a food quality point of view.
Two incidents happened in South Africa. One was pressure by Parliament on an asset manager who I wouldn't mention, and a lot of people would be familiar with that example, where there was pressure that there need to be a full disclosure on investments that they have made, who benefited from those investments, and basically it was in the unlisted space, not what you find on the JSE. And secondly, I think, which most South Africans would be familiar with, and people external to our country, the notion of state capture and corruption. So that has influenced largely and put pressure on entities to disclose their investment decisions, to the extent that, I mean, relating back to the example of the DBSA, other DFIs, particularly Land Bank, there was a company based in Cape Town, I met them, who at one stage decided they wanted to pull the plug from funding, because we are largely dependent on funding and there's very little that we get from the state. So they wanted to pull the plug basically on issues of governance. There is pressure, and for good reasons, for social cohesion and national unity, that we need to be scaling up our operations on financing of emerging farmers and smallholders, so that we need to be partly, for food security, social cohesion, as I mentioned, but also I would assume it will address the concerns that Professor Swilling proposed, because I still believe that you need to encourage local markets, production on the local scale, to the which respects people's dietary requirements. Because there's no point in us, dependent on the dietary requirements that have been foreign to the local community, so that they can continue with their culture and also make the local economy quite sustainable. But
the DBSA, like other DFIs in South Africa, are really good at the formalities of conforming to the necessary requirements in terms of policy, participation, consultation, gender, etc., etc. But that doesn't necessarily translate into what I would call genuine, impactful development practice. So there is agreement in the DBSA board that over the last good while, the D in the DBSA, i.e. development, hasn't had sufficient emphasis. It's been a small D. And how do we make the D in the DBSA a big D? And over the last 18 months, there has been a really interesting process of rethinking what we mean by development. And a new strategy has emerged, which is going to result in a new generation of funding mechanisms to support real local development initiatives.
Firstly, I think cities have to be trusted, and in order to be trusted, they have to be transparent. There's a lot of mistrust at the moment in cities, and I don't think that the politicians and the bureaucratic leaders of cities handle their relationships with the public often as well as they can. Second point is a very obvious point, and it would sound particularly obvious in most societies, that the quality of the staff that are employed in cities has to be the best possible quality. Politicians who are there for relatively short periods of time, not necessarily highly trained in the fields that they are in, tend to be making many more decisions than they should be without the direct support of the experts that they have employed or their predecessors have employed to give them the information on that. And that is the relationship between cities and movements for social justice of various kinds. In democratic countries where movements for social justice play a significant role, the immediate instinct in many cities, especially highly unequal cities and cities where the electoral patterns force politicians into perverse behaviors with regard to their population. The gut response of the politician to the social justice movement is that it's a front for the other political parties. I don't think that we've learned in South Africa to build appropriate relationships between the formal political structures of the city and the informal ones, especially the social justice organizations in poorer areas.
So there's an area not far from here called Philippi, and there's a Philippi farming area that supplies 90% of the vegetables to people in Cape Town. Now, on the one hand, the city is thinking in this way, in some economic terms. Okay, if we grant a mining license, if we build houses on this area, etc., that's going to be good for the city. That's their thinking. The people in that area are like, we supply 90% of the vegetables to Cape Town. This is an important agricultural area. Underneath this area is this massive aquifer in the Cape Flats, which has a massive amount of water, which the city is now finally tapping into. So all the issues you spoke about, thinking about towing icebergs, etc., to find solutions when you have water under the city. But the city decision then is to grant prospecting license to do sand mining, which will contaminate the water, build this infrastructure of shopping malls and houses that will basically collapse the ecosystem because the aquifer requires the regeneration to happen in a natural way because 90% is covered with buildings. In that case, all it takes is the city or the relevant officials speaking to the community in terms of, this is what we're thinking, this is what we're planning, we want to inform you, we want to engage you, and so on. And some of those discussions may result in alternative thinking or finding some way forward. I think each of the banks inviting civil society more proactively. So not seeing civil society as these are just the troublemakers, the obstacles, they'll make a big noise. But as other speakers have alluded to, what you have is some great thinkers, some good reports, things that could be put on the table. So Mark, for example, with the New Development Bank throwing in a lot of money in terms of renewables, I think convening civil society in South Africa around finding some of those options which you believe in yourself in terms of community ownership and doing a different kind of solidarity economy, which is absolutely crucial to reduce inequalities and so on.
I've realized that financial institutions hold the key because they are the ones that would give requirements for development programs. We engage a lot with property developers who in most instances would be developing for a particular owner. If it's residential development, it's to develop in order to sell. So therefore, in most instances, the first question you would get would be, well, it doesn't make an investment decision to future-proof and be resilient and be green because there is a green cost premium. And studies have proved that the green cost premium might be probably 5% of your capital outlay, but in the next 10 to 15 years, it would have paid itself over and over again due to efficiency savings. And also, it would be a more sustainable kind of development. I would like you to give us just 3 points, some take-homes. What are the considerations for the new development bank in the aspect of sustainable infrastructure for a better future?
Development is about what's good for people, and surely this should be in service of people. So see civil society as your friend. We can be a little bit scratchy sometimes, but there's enough social science knowledge, there's enough natural science knowledge, we've got spatial databases, we've got lots of experts in all of the BRICS countries. In South Africa, I'm more familiar with South Africa, certainly we do. And we need to make use of this knowledge in order to better plan and direct where we go with development, with infrastructural development. So we can save ourselves a lot of trouble, a lot of unnecessary cost down the line that we could have avoided by thinking more clearly and being more inclusive right up front.
New Development Bank need to put that at the top of the agenda. The issues of disclosure in South Africa are key. So, and we can't compromise on that. I think the second issue that we shouldn't lose sight of is what were the guiding principles on the establishment of the NDP. One of the key things might not be written in any agreement was to promote South-to-South trade relations.
You know, rise to the level of sufficiently good international systems, or is it a question of supporting the development of systems in developing countries to the point that they are able to achieve much more complex and satisfactory outcomes than they would have under other circumstances. So I hope that the Asian Development Bank and certainly the New Development Bank will be profitable enough and will find enough really profitable projects that they'll be able to make the kind of investment in supporting the development of skills and systems at the key governance levels within organizations.
Country systems and country independence is obviously really important and key, but that shouldn't take away the responsibility of financial institutions. So where institutions are funding projects that are causing harm, financial institutions definitely have a responsibility. But not just causing harm, a lot of institutions have signed up to global agreements, so the Paris commitments, the SDGs, and so on, so ensuring that level of accountability in terms of countries and the financing projects of banks is important.